Nice. G'day guys, Tobini here, and on this episode of Chit Chat Chai, I'm drinking water out of a bone broth jar, and we're going to be speaking about algebra. Now, algebra is in fact the key to manifesting your dream life in this human existence. However, this is just the one part we weren't taught at school. So without further ado, let's just jump into it, because it's currently 8:45. I'm fucking cracking into algebra on a Tuesday, so let's get into it. Now, I'm gonna just waffle a little bit about what algebra is in my mind before we go further, because often people are what's algebra? How does it work? What do I use it for? I don't need to use this in my life. I wish they taught me how to use tax or all this, whatever the fuck you thought you need to be taught in maths. Algebra is actually a really good thing, but they just weren't teaching it the right way. So algebra allows us to play around with the concept of manipulation, so to speak. So we can have variables in any form of contextual parameters that we set up, and we denote that through x and y, or a or theta, or whatever symbol. So maths is all about symbols, algebra is all about symbols. We use symbols to evaluate whatever we want. And so by doing this, by allowing to just play around, to add, x equals y plus this minus that, or we start to play around with the potentiality of what this universe can be. So in my previous episode, I showed how we can have polarity within the human body, and that polarity creates the fields or the dimensional reality that we then interact with. So within that dimensional reality that we have, I started to show up that we have this concept of x and y axis, and then also a z axis. And so we can start to see here, as I said before, x equals y. We can then also graph that as something tangible. And so if I were to graph x to y, i.e. x equals y, I have a perfect 45-degree angle that will go at a positive slope upwards. So that is the image on the screen now. And so by just showcasing that, we can start to see how there's already a link between the human existence of potential realities on these x and y, or these arbitrary planes that we have set up to understand the reality which we embody. And so just by fundamentally doing that and understanding algebra as having that capacity to play around with the infinite, opposed to just something that is just this rudimentary thing that I need to, get over to get my ATAR, or, pass this exam or whatever, we start to see how it can actually represent the human existence opposed to just being something within the book. So, with that all being said, how does that actually kind of moves towards something that we can start to play around with within our subconscious and conscious mind, to then download within the human experience to then start to live out that reality? So as we start to redefine things within our mind, we then start to perceive the world at a deeper capacity. And in doing so, we're growing, we're changing. And so we can represent that on a line, right? So if I have an x and a y axis, and I have my, what am I doing here? I have my x-axis going along the bottom, my y-axis in my vertical, and I have my x-axis equaling time, and I have my y-axis equaling experience. Because technically, the human experience is connected to time. So we can only experience our humanness if the element of time is at play. And so we can graph this as human experience and time. And so as I go along time and have human experience, we have this endpoint, obviously, as death. And so we can draw death on our graph, right? Like, this is how we can start to play around with this whole concept of death and like, oh, it's scary and all these things. Let's graph it. Let's see it. Let's play it. Let's put it on something and like get to know it. Go, how you going, man? What's going on? How can I play with you? How can I learn from you? And so if I graph my death, if I put it on my axis here of potentiality of time and put it somewhere over here, right? And draw that in as a line. So as my endpoint, we'll have an asymptote. We call that, if we have a dead point or an end point or some form of line, we can call it an asymptote. So if we cross that line, we cross our 0 point, we're dead, alright? And so that asymptote of our time is going to be our death. And so if I go back into examining the human experience from that linearity of time equals experience, and I have a perfectly 45-degree angle, then you can comfortably see that at some point I'm going to inevitably die, right? Because that straight line is eventually going to hit my asymptote of death. But that is only if I perceive my human reality linearly. And this is where, albeit, yes, time here is a variable, but it is exactly that, a variable. So it can be manipulated. Period. That is mathematical truth, scientific definition. Time is malleable, period, because it's a variable, okay? So, because our time is malleable and it's a variable of consciousness, because consciousness is the only fundamental thing, we can start to understand, alright, if I perceive my human existence as an algebraic function of consciousness, what does that allow me to redefine myself as? What form of algebraic expression of consciousness do I want to embody? Do I want to embody some form of linear development? For me, no. Some people that might be the case. This is where it completely is the beauty of mathematics and the potentiality. Whatever line you want to draw on that asymptote of x and y. But this is the one that I'm really after. And this is the one that I wanted to share. So what happens if I have x is equal to y squared? What happens then? Well, I'm not going to go into the whole functionality of the square value, and that can be a whole other thing. But that on a graph looks like this. Basically, it starts off and then all of a sudden kicks off to infinity and keeps expanding. So if I were to graph that on my human experience, all of a sudden, you know, linear, it's going like this. Exponential, actually, it kind of dips under first. It dips under first. So what does that say? Although sometimes if we take a step back linearly, it actually allows us to catapult ourselves into the future potential of what we are here to be. And we see that simply through algebra. So if I'm an exponential graph and I take the time to be still, that first little bit of my reality being real still, and then all of a sudden I start to grow, and then I start to grow, and then I turn into this algebraic function that never reaches its asymptote of death. Because I'm expanding and having so much experience within each unit of time that I actually fundamentally keep pushing my death away from me simultaneously as I call it towards me. And so as I start to fractalize my human experience down into more and more moments through playing with the quantum reality, I start to embody the functionality of the exponential growth within the human experience that is fundamentally encoded within the mathematics of the architecture of our universe. And so by understanding and embodying the knowledge that we have already observed within this reality, because it's easy, it's inherent, we don't need to go find anything deeper within quantum mechanics or all of this. The answers are already there. We've already been shown mathematics. You can embody these concepts very young. The spirit is given all the answers from 0 to 7, and then we have some form of, like, just the soul comes back in and we have to embody the humanness again. But once we remember the capacity of our infinite, then we start to play with the potential of growth. And this is fundamentally what the exponential graph or the x equals y squared functionality of our algebraic universe shows us. So if we download x equals y squared of time equals experience squared, so I just keep doubling down, squaring itself. And how do we do that? How do we embody that? Well, this is the key. If I'm timesing every single moment together, i.e. squaring it. So what does square represent? It means y times y. So y and y have to be the same to be squared. So if that's my human experience, and the experience is my y functionality, I need to be able to assume the fact that every single reflection or every single other being is on that same graph line as me, and therefore our experience is arbitrary to the individual and therefore the same. Therefore, algebraically, it shows us that our consciousness and our human experience is separate, but we have a functionality of consciousness that lies true within every single person, and we see it within the algebra as in experience equals experience. So therefore, in order to embody the exponential growth within the universal capacity, we need to perceive the other person or everybody externally as us and treat them as such, and therefore we will be able to empathize with them, learn from them, download their lessons, and start to exponentially grow into our infinite capacity of consciousness in this human experience. Alright, so that's what they didn't teach you in maths. So I hope that can be the missing link in understanding and posing how algebra is actually the code. So when we watch The Matrix and they say, like, oh, coding on a computer, all of those languages are all derivatives of our already human experience. So when we observe the higher opposed to creating something of the lower, we observe mathematics. So if we take as mathematics as the code of the universe and code our reality accordingly, we actually embody the matrix, opposed to perceiving the consciousness here and we're creating something that can be separate then. That's not how computers or consciousness works. If we are here and we create something that is a shadow effect, it is a lower dimensional reality to what we are coming from. And that's where coding sits in my mind. So that's why AI cannot take over the world, period. Alright, so, but I'll talk about something else. So, if we start to embody the algebraic code of our functionality, we become Neo, we code our universe, we create the experience that we want to live. Alright, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Hit that like button, subscribe for the next one. This is Chit Chat Chai. I'm going to have a drink now of my organic water bone broth and see you in the next video.